Have you ever asked yourself why certain truths about men and women are ignored, silenced, or labeled as offensive? Why, despite everything history, psychology, and experience have shown us, we continue to insist that men and women are fundamentally the same, not just in value, but in nature, motivation, and desire? Carl Jung didn't agree with that illusion. He believed that beneath our collective masks, beneath the social roles and polite expectations, there are primordial forces, deeply rooted psychological patterns that shape how men and women see each other, desire each other, and fail to understand each other. He called these forces archetypes, and one of the most important and most misunderstood is the anima, the feminine image inside the male psyche. While philosophers like Schopenhauer saw women through a lens of biology and instinct, Jung looked deeper. He saw that much of what men believe about women and what women expect from men comes not from rational understanding, but from projection. We don't fall in love with who someone is. We fall in love with what they reflect back to us from the depths of our own unconscious. For Jung, this explains why so many relationships are built on confusion and disappointment. A man does not see a woman clearly. He sees his anima, his inner image of femininity, shaped by childhood, myths, dreams, and collective stories. He falls not for a person, but for a symbol. And when reality eventually pierces the illusion, disillusionment sets in. This projection is not an error. It's a mechanism of the psyche. But the danger comes when we mistake the projection for the person. Jung believed that modern society encourages this confusion. We're taught to believe in soulmate fantasies, idealized love, and eternal compatibility. But all of this avoids the deeper truth that men and women carry within them unconscious energies that collide, attract, and repel with forces far beyond conscious control. The brutal truth? Most people never really fall in love with one another. They fall in love with their own projections. And when those projections fade, they feel betrayed. Not because the other person changed, but because the illusion died. Jung's view of the feminine and of women themselves was not demeaning, but deeply complex. He didn't reduce women to instinct or biology. Instead, he saw them as embodiments of profound psychic power, connected to nature, the moon, the body, and the mystery of the unconscious. But he also warned that when men project their anima onto women, when they see women only as healers, muses, redeemers, they rob women of their full humanity. Worse, they remain trapped in psychological immaturity. The man who worships the feminine without integrating it remains a boy. He seeks emotional rescue. He avoids responsibility. He romanticizes instead of relating. And the woman caught in that projection is often left with a burden she never asked to carry, the burden of being someone's fantasy instead of her own full self. This, Jung believed, is one of the roots of relational suffering. Not hatred, not inequality, but unconscious confusion. So what happens when these fantasies begin to crack? When men begin to see women not as goddesses or enemies, but as human beings with their own shadows, needs, and instincts, that moment, often painful, is the beginning of psychological growth. But only if the man has the courage to withdraw the projection and meet the feminine within himself first. And that is what no one wants to hear, because it means that love is not about finding the one. It's about facing the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. And that takes work. That takes shadow integration. That takes a kind of emotional honesty that society, with all its polished scripts and romantic narratives, rarely prepares us for. If the male psyche is haunted by a misunderstood anima, the female psyche wrestles with the animus, her inner image of masculinity. And just as men project onto women, women project onto men. Strength, salvation, security, danger. These mirrored projections fuel the attraction, but also the endless misunderstandings. Jung didn't say this to divide us. He said it so we, could finally begin to meet each other beyond illusion, beyond projection, as whole individuals on the long path of individuation. But to get there, we must first confront the fantasy. Carl Jung did not believe that men and women were blank slates, sculpted entirely by culture and socialization. He acknowledged the importance of upbringing and environment, yes, but he also pointed to something older, deeper, and more difficult to confront: the archetypal forces embedded in our psyche, shaped by millions of years of evolution, experience, and myth. To Jung, the idea that men and women are psychologically identical is not just naive, it's dangerous. It blinds us to the subtle but essential ways our instincts, biological drives, and unconscious images shape behavior. When we ignore those forces, we do not become more enlightened. We become more lost, more reactive, and more likely to blame the other for what we haven't resolved within ourselves. Where Schopenhauer saw women as irrational and instinctive, in a demeaning way, Jung reframed this view. He saw instinct not as inferiority, but as depth, as connection to the unconscious, to nature, to cycles and rhythms men have long feared or tried to dominate. In Jung's model, women were not creatures of surface emotion, but guardians of the inner life. They carried the mystery of the body, the intuition of feeling, and the symbolic knowledge of the moon, the earth, the womb, all things forgotten. In a world obsessed with light and logic, but this connection to the instinctual doesn't come without consequence. Jung argued that just as men are often seduced by the illusion of control, women can be overtaken by the pull of emotion. Both genders suffer when they lose balance, when the conscious mind becomes dominated by what lies beneath. In women, the unintegrated animus can appear as cold rationality, sharp criticism, or possessiveness. In men, the repressed anima may emerge as emotional chaos, projection, or dependence. These forces are not chosen, they are inherited. They live within us, whether we are aware of them or not. And this is where instinct becomes so crucial, because instinct, when left unconscious, does not disappear. It controls from the shadows. Much of what we call falling in love, desire, or attraction is not a rational decision, but a movement of the psyche, driven by ancestral needs, archetypal longings, and unspoken inner wounds. For example, Jung believed that men often pursue greatness, not just to achieve, but to escape the fear of inner emptiness. The drive to build empires, to conquer, to invent, is often a compensation for the absence of emotional integration. Men externalize their energy, project it into the world, because they have not yet learned to face their inner feminine, the anima. And that's why many men feel deeply drawn to women who embody softness, beauty, nurturing, or intuition, not just because they find them attractive, but because those traits symbolize something missing within themselves. They don't just want the woman, they want what she represents. This dynamic creates a profound misunderstanding. A man may idealize a woman for her sensitivity, for her calm, for her soulfulness, not realizing that what he's actually seeing is his own unconscious, projected outward. And once the relationship deepens and the projection begins to fade, he often experiences disappointment or anger. He might say, "She changed," when in truth she didn't change, the illusion did. Jung called this moment withdrawal of the projection. And though painful, it's the beginning of maturity. It is the gateway to real relationship, one where each person sees the other not as savior or object, but as a fellow soul wrestling with their own shadows. Now consider the reverse. Women, too, often project. The animus, the masculine figure within the female psyche, is frequently idealized as a protector, a hero, a strong and steady hand that can bring order and safety. When a woman finds a man who reflects this image, even faintly are, the attraction is intense. But again, it's not really about him. It's about the inner archetype, the image that lives in her unconscious. And just as the man is crushed when his fantasy of the perfect woman fails to hold, the woman becomes disillusioned when the man proves fallible, emotional, or weak. She wanted the hero but got a human being. Jung never said these patterns are wrong. They're natural, but when left unexamined, they cause suffering. Instinct, unchecked, leads us not toward love, but toward projection, disappointment, and resentment. So what's the solution? Jung believed that the path forward is not to destroy gender differences, but to become conscious of them. The feminine and masculine live within every person, and only by recognizing, integrating, and respecting these opposites can we begin to relate to one another as whole beings. He called this lifelong journey individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are by confronting your own unconscious. It means owning your shadow, reclaiming your projections, and no longer demanding that the opposite sex carry your wounds, fulfill your unmet needs, or complete you. Most people, Jung believed, never make it this far. They remain trapped in loops of instinct and fantasy, forever blaming the other for their inner conflict. But those who do the work, those who dare to explore their own psyche, begin to see relationships not as salvation, but as mirrors, not as a battlefield, but as a path to wholeness. Carl Jung believed that what most people call love is not love at all. At least, not in the way we imagine it, not as mutual understanding, not as deep spiritual connection, not even as a conscious choice. In his view, love, as experienced by the majority, is more accurately described as projection, a vivid, emotionally charged illusion cast by the unconscious onto another person, usually of the opposite sex. And this projection, Jung warned, is so powerful, so enchanting, that most people mistake it for truth. They believe they've met their soulmate, their other half, their destined counterpart, but what they've actually encountered is the face of their own psyche, reflected in another human being. For a man, this projection comes through the anima, the internal feminine archetype, shaped by all the women he has known, loved, feared, or imagined. His first imprint of the feminine, often his mother, forms the foundation of this inner image. As he matures, cultural stories, personal experience, and unconscious longing layer new meanings onto it. Eventually, he doesn't see women as they are, but as vessels for this archetypal image. He falls in love not with the woman, but with his own lost soul wearing her face. Jung didn't say this to dismiss romantic love. Quite the opposite. He believed that through these projections, we're actually being called toward wholeness. The anima represents the undeveloped emotional and intuitive side of the male psyche. When a man feels drawn to a woman who embodies these qualities, it's not just about sexual attraction, it's about integration. His soul is calling him to retrieve something he has lost or ignored. But here's the problem. Rather than do the inner work to reclaim those qualities, most men try to possess them through the woman. Instead of developing sensitivity, empathy, and inner stillness within themselves, they cling to the woman who represents those things and try to keep her close. And when she fails to remain a perfect reflection of that inner ideal, as she inevitably will, they feel betrayed. The projection breaks, the illusion dissolves, and the man is left with a choice. Either blame her for changing or recognize that he never truly knew her in the first place. This breaking of the illusion is what Jung called the moment of withdrawal. It's painful, disorienting, often humiliating, but it is also essential, because only then, when the projection has been shattered, can real love begin. A love not based on fantasy or unconscious desire, but on clear-sighted presence and mutual recognition. Now flip the dynamic women too fall under projection. In their case, the projection is shaped by the animus, the internal masculine archetype, often formed by the image of the father, later infused with cultural ideals of strength, intellect, protection, and purpose. The animus appears in dreams and fantasies as a wise man, a warrior, a guide, or at its darker poles as a dominating tyrant or cold critic. When a woman projects her animus onto a man, she often sees him as more than he is, a symbol of salvation, of order, of purpose. She feels he can lead her, stabilize her, give her meaning, but what she's really yearning for is inner direction, inner strength, mental clarity, traits she has not yet developed or accepted within herself. And when the man fails to embody those things perfectly, when he falters, becomes vulnerable, emotional, or lost, she too feels disillusioned. The illusion breaks, and she too faces a choice: retreat into resentment or begin the work of animus integration, learning to listen to her own inner voice of reason and structure rather than seeking it exclusively in another. Jung described this entire dynamic as a tragedy of modern relationships. Not because love is doomed, but because most people never recognize what's truly happening. They are not falling in love with each other. They are falling into each other's archetypes. And as long as those archetypes remain unconscious, the relationship is more a play than a partnership. He wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking." But what happens when love is power? What happens when the unconscious uses attraction as a way to manipulate, dominate, or fulfill unmet childhood needs? Then what we call passion becomes a battlefield. Relationships become power struggles, masquerading as devotion. We chase what we lack, control what we fear, and use each other to avoid meeting ourselves. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow becomes crucial. The shadow is everything we repress, deny, or disown within ourselves. And in intimate relationships, it doesn't disappear. It gets projected onto the other, the controlling man who accuses his partner of being manipulative, the anxious woman who sees her partner as emotionally unavailable. Often what we most hate in the other is what we secretly carry within. Love then becomes not just an opportunity for happiness, but for healing. If we are brave enough to look at our projections, to reclaim our shadows, to withdraw the anima and animus and see the other as they truly are, we begin the slow and painful path toward real intimacy. Not fantasy, not possession, but presence. Jung knew that few are willing to do this work. It requires self-confrontation, humility, and the loss of comforting illusions. But for those who do, for those who can meet the other not as a rescuer or a project, but as a whole person walking their own path, love transforms. It becomes a vessel not for validation, but for transformation. It becomes sacred. Carl Jung never promised comfort. His psychology wasn't built to soothe egos or reinforce cultural myths. It was built to liberate the soul, to guide us through the darkness within ourselves and into the clarity of self-knowledge. And when it came to the relationship between men and women, he offered no easy path, no utopia of perfect harmony. What he offered was truth, and truth is never easy. The brutal reality no one wants to hear is this: most of what we call love is a mirror. Most of what we desire in the other is something missing in ourselves. Most of our heartbreak comes not from what the other did, but from the collapse of our own illusions. And that collapse is necessary, because only when the projection breaks can the real relationship begin. Jung didn't call for sameness between the sexes. He didn't claim men and women are indistinguishable souls in different bodies. He saw the feminine and masculine as complementary forces, each carrying unique wisdom, each carrying unique wounds. And when these forces meet unconsciously, they clash. But when they meet consciously, they heal. Love is not supposed to complete you. It is supposed to awaken you. If you see in the other something divine, ask yourself, is that divinity also buried inside me? If you are drawn to someone who brings you calm, safety, excitement, or strength, ask, what part of me have I silenced that craves that energy? Because until we do that inner work, we will continue to repeat the same cycle: attraction, projection, disappointment, blame. We will mistake our own wounded soul for the soul of another. And we will call that romance. Jung taught that the only way out of this cycle is through individuation, the long, difficult journey of becoming whole. That means meeting your anima, integrating your animus, confronting your shadow, reclaiming your projections, and standing not as half a person looking for completion, but as a full person willing to meet another, not to save or be saved, but to share the path. That is not sentimental love. It's not storybook love. It's not comfortable love. It is real love, and in a world drowning in illusions, that may be the rarest thing of all.